Hello Traceable Designers. Today we're making the arch style side panels with a rod pocket. These panels are used with the arched center panel from the Traceable Designer Arched Cornice style Valance. Let's begin by sizing our fabric. I'm using the small sizing line. I do recommend making small side panels. They typically work for just about any size center panel other than very, very wide windows. So we're going to size our fabric using the folded fabric edge. And since I do have a print here, I do want to make sure it's positioned properly where I can capture it below. And also I have plenty of room for my rod pocket. So just pull out your Heat and Bond Ultra Hold fusible fabric backing, and I like to fold the fabric or the paper in half so that I can properly size it for my panel, because this will be actually traced on the folded fabric edge. So I'm going to position my backing so that it falls below the print that I'd like to capture, and also make sure it's centered for the proper sizing line. So I'm doing this by positioning the design form over the fabric where I'd like it to be positioned. Your fusible backing needs to be aligned with your rod pocket sizing line. So there's a lined fabric positioning line marker across the top of the design form. Make sure that that's level. And if your fabric is long enough, you can use the full 17-inch piece. Otherwise, just cut a little bit of the excess off the bottom, making sure that you do still extend past the bottom of the design form so you can fuse your lining. So now I've cut my backing to fit inside of the back side of the fabric section, making sure it doesn't extend onto the ironing board. I do have excess room on the bottom. The number one thing you want to make sure of is that your fusible backing does go across the lined fabric positioning marker, and that you do not cut it too short for the design form. You want to make sure the lining is completely fused around all the edges for tracing. So now that I've got that aligned, I'm making sure that it's straight across my print. I do have a fabric print, so it's easy to sort of eyeball that and make sure it's straight. Then use a dry iron, no steam, and start in the center with a sweeping motion out toward the side. Usually a medium-high heat works perfectly, so just continue until the backing is completely adhered and you've deposited the glue on the back side of your fabric. Then once the paper has completely cooled, just carefully peel it back to expose the glue, and then hold on to that paper. You'll use that to protect your ironing board later when you're adding your edge trim. For your lining, make sure it includes a very straight edge across the top and does extend past all of the edges. You want to make sure all the glue is 100% covered. Then just start in the middle with a sweeping motion from the center and then sweep out toward the sides, and this will just move along until that's completely attached. You want to move from the center out so that you don't have buckling on your lining or on your valance, and make sure that the lining is aligned across the top edge of the glue so that you cover everything. You don't want to make your rod pocket and have that seal shut. So continue until that is completely fused to the back side of your fabric. Then we'll move on to tracing the design form. When you fold your fabric section, you want to just make sure you line up the edges of the lining so everything's nice and straight, and then just put a pin through the fabric to make sure that holds in place while you're tracing. To trace the design form, you want to make sure you have proper positioning, so you'll align the lined fabric positioning marker straight across the top edge of the lining and use the proper width sizing line. In my case, it's the small sizing line positioned across the folded fabric edge. To trace the design form, make sure you press on the design form to hold it in place, and then start on the right side at the lining top edge, and then just trace around the design form shape. If you have to go over it a couple of times, that's fine. Just make sure the line is very clear for cutting, and then you'll end at the folded fabric edge. Then we're going to trace off the rod pocket section. This will straighten out the fabric. So you'll trace across the top of the design form. It's a little bit more difficult to trace because you're tracing right on top of the fabric. Just go right across the top of the design form, pressing to hold it in place, and then connect the line on the right. To cut out your fabric section, you're going to position the folded side facing you, and then carefully just follow along the trace line. You want to make sure you get your curves nice and even, because this is the shape of the panel. So follow that line really well. Use a nice sharp pair of scissors. And then just continue around the curves and then right up the side across the rod pocket section, the unlined section. Then turn the cut side so it's facing you, and then just follow that line right across the top to finish cutting out the side panels. Then you'll have a really nice straight edge on top. So as you can see, we have a full panel, and we're going to be cutting this in half to make two mirrored side panels. So let's move on to the rod hanging pocket. You'll cut pieces of heat and bond that fit inside of the folded fabric section. So you fold that fabric over to meet the top edge of the lining, then position as many pieces as you need of overlapped backing to stay right inside of the fold. You don't want to overlap onto the ironing board or onto the lining. And then once that has completely cooled, just peel the paper back to expose the glue, and then pull the pocket over onto the lining, and then we'll just fuse that pocket down. That will have an opening for the rod pocket. So fold that over, take your time fusing the pocket. You're going through a couple layers of fabric, so it might take a little bit of time. You can press, but just don't burn your fabric. And then when that's completely sealed, we're going to fold this fabric in half again, run an iron down the crease to mark the center, and then we'll just cut this panel in half, making two identical side panels. To give a finished look to your panels, just add some braided gimp trim. This is flexible edge trim. I'm using a 3/8 inch braided gimp. So section off your pieces, make sure you have plenty of excess trim so that you don't run out. And then I'm using a tube glue. This is Unique Stitch. It's easy to apply, and it dries clear. So I like to run a thin line around the entire shape. It does take a while for this to dry, so that'll give you some time to reposition the trim, and then just lay that trim right on top of that thin layer and really follow the edges. So you make sure that you have a perfectly shaped panel, so you can even check it on the back to make sure that it looks perfectly placed. You'll have some time to reposition it before it completely dries. So continue all the way around across the bottom, and then you'll just snip that edge trim flush against the side, and then use one long strip across each side of each side panel. So make sure your trim direction is also correct. When you're adding those separate pieces, you want the trim to go the proper direction. So just double check that. Then to finish, just glue the edges behind the panel. The cornice-style side and center panels are attached by using Velcro. The center panel will fold over the side panels and secure to the back of the rod pocket and to the back of the curtain rod. So depending upon your placement, you need to determine that first, and then you'll be able to determine where to match up your Velcro, your hard side Velcro on the back rod pocket of the side panels. So you'll need to cut 1 inch by about 2 inch strips, and those will go in a vertical direction on the back of the rod pocket to catch the center panel when it folds over the rod pocket. So once you've determined your placement, just fuse those sections of heat and bond down. Then when you peel that back, you'll have some exposed glue there. So when you take the tape off of your hard side Velcro, it will hold solidly to the back of the side panel. So when you hang your panel, if you have to remove it or adjust it, they won't come right off. When you slip your side panels on the curtain rod, then you will fold the center panel over to secure to the back of the rod and the side panels. So make your center panel, follow the instructions for making the cornice style center panel, and you'll be ready to hang your new cornice style valance. Thank you for joining me, Traceable Designers, and remember, you can always make your mark with Traceable Designer.